My name is Evelyn Margaret Thompson, and I'm 73 years old. For the past 50 years, I've been the heart of our family's Thanksgiving tradition. Every November, my house would transform into a warm haven filled with the aroma of roasted turkey, homemade stuffing, and pumpkin pie made from scratch using my grandmother's recipe. But last Thanksgiving changed everything. It was the day my family forgot I existed, and the day I decided to forget them too. Let me take you back to the beginning, because understanding my story requires knowing the woman I used to be. I married my dear husband, Harold, in 1969. We were blessed with 4 children: Margaret Rose, born in 1971, William James in 1973, Dorothy May in 1975, and our youngest, Robert Charles, in 1978. Harold was a good man, a mechanic who worked with his hands and provided for us with dignity and pride. We weren't wealthy, but we were rich in love. When Harold passed away in 2015 after 46 years of marriage, I thought my world had ended. The children had all grown up and moved away by then. Margaret Rose became a successful lawyer in Chicago, married to a surgeon named Dr. Jonathan Hayes. They have 2 children, Emma Catherine and James Robert, both in their 20s now. William James followed his father's footsteps, but expanded, beyond mechanics, owning 3 auto repair shops across the state. He married Linda Sue, and they have 3 boys, Harold Jr., Michael Francis, and Peter William. Dorothy May, my middle daughter, became a teacher and married Thomas Anderson, a banker. They have twin daughters, Sarah Elizabeth and Mary Catherine, both married with children of their own. My youngest, Robert Charles, surprised us all by becoming a chef. He owns 2 restaurants and married a lovely girl named Patricia Ann. They have 1 son, David Harold, named after his grandfather. For decades, our family gatherings were legendary in our small town of Millfield. Every Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter, and summer barbecue happened at my house on Maple Street. I was the glue that held us together, the one who remembered birthdays, anniversaries, and graduations. I was the one who sent care packages to grandchildren, away at college, who knitted sweaters for new babies, and who always had a warm meal ready when any of my children needed comfort. After Harold's funeral, I threw myself into being the family matriarch even more intensely. It was my way of coping with the grief. I expanded our Thanksgiving tradition, inviting not just my children and their families, but also their friends, neighbors, and anyone who might be alone for the holiday. My dining room table, which Harold had built himself from oak wood, could seat 16 people when fully extended. I would spend weeks preparing, making lists, shopping, cooking, and decorating. The tradition became so important to me that I started planning for the next year's Thanksgiving, the day after each celebration ended. I kept detailed notebooks with menu preferences, seating arrangements, and even notes about conversations from previous years. My grandchildren grew up expecting Grandma Evelyn's house to be the center of every holiday celebration. But as the years passed after Harold's death, I began to notice subtle changes. My children's visits became shorter and less frequent. Phone calls that used to be weekly became monthly, then sporadic. When I'd call them, they always seemed busy, distracted, in a hurry to end the conversation. I told myself they were just living their own lives, building their careers, raising their families. I made excuses for them because that's what mothers do. The first real warning sign came in 2022, 2 years ago. Margaret Rose called me just 3 days before Thanksgiving to tell me she wouldn't be coming. Her husband's family had planned a ski trip to Colorado, and they decided to join them instead. She said it so casually, as if 50 years of tradition meant nothing. I was hurt, but I understood. Marriages require compromise, and sometimes that means splitting holidays between families. But then William James called the next day with a similar story. Linda Sue's sister was hosting Thanksgiving in Florida, and they thought it would be nice to have a warm weather holiday for once. Dorothy May followed suit, explaining that Thomas's mother was getting older and wanted the family to celebrate at her house in the neighboring county. Only Robert Charles and his family came that year, along with 3 neighbors I had invited, and an elderly gentleman from church whose wife had recently passed away. It was a smaller gathering than usual, but we had a wonderful time. Robert Charles helped me cook, and little David, who was 15 then, entertained us with stories from his high school drama club. I convinced myself that it was just a coincidence, that next year things would return to normal. I was wrong. Last year in 2023, the excuses became more elaborate and somehow less believable. Margaret Rose was suddenly passionate about volunteering at a homeless shelter on Thanksgiving Day. William James had decided that traveling for holidays was too stressful with 3 teenagers. Dorothy May claimed that the twins were hosting their in-laws and needed her help. And Robert Charles, my baby, my youngest, told me that Patricia Ann's family had invited them to a reunion in California that just happened to fall on Thanksgiving weekend. I spent Thanksgiving alone for the first time in my adult life. I made a small turkey, enough for leftovers, and sat at Harold's oak table by myself. I tried to be grateful, tried to find meaning in the solitude, but mostly I just felt forgotten. The house that had always been filled with laughter and conversation echoed with silence. That night, as I cleaned up the dishes and put away the extra chairs I had hopefully set out, I made a decision. I would not let myself be hurt like this again. If my children were too busy for family tradition, too important for their old mother, then I would find new ways to spend my holidays. If you're enjoying this story and can relate to family dynamics like these, please consider joining our community by hitting that subscribe button. Stories like Evelyn's remind us that we're not alone in our experiences. This brings me to last Thanksgiving, November 2024, the day that changed everything forever. I had learned my lesson from the previous year. Instead of spending weeks preparing for a gathering that might not happen, I decided to be proactive. In early October, I called each of my children to ask about their Thanksgiving plans. I was careful not to sound demanding or guilt-inducing. I simply asked, as any mother might, whether they would be joining me for our traditional celebration. Margaret. Rose was the first to respond, and her answer was delivered with the casual indifference that had become so familiar. "Oh, Mom, didn't I mention? Jonathan's colleague invited us to their place in the Hamptons. It's supposed to be quite an event, and it would be rude to decline. You understand, don't you?" William James was next, his voice rushed as always. "Ma, I'm sorry, but the boys have football playoffs that weekend, and Linda Sue's been planning this big party for the other parents. You know how these things are." Dorothy May's excuse was perhaps the most creative yet. "Mother, Thomas and I have decided to start a new tradition of giving back to the community. We're volunteering at 3 different soup kitchens on Thanksgiving Day. We feel it's important to show the twins the value of service." And Robert Charles, the one I thought would never abandon our tradition, delivered the final blow. "Mom, Patricia Ann's been talking about wanting a quiet Thanksgiving, just the 3 of us. David's been stressed with college applications, and we thought a low-key day at home would be better for him." Each conversation ended the same way, with promises to call me on Thanksgiving Day and suggestions that we get together soon for a nice lunch or dinner. But I had heard these promises before, and I knew how empty they were. As I hung up the phone after Robert Charles's call, something inside me shifted. The hurt I had been carrying for years transformed into something harder, colder. I realized that I had been clinging to a relationship that no longer existed. My children had moved on from me, from our traditions, from everything I had thought was important. They saw me as an obligation, a relic from their past that they needed to manage rather than cherish. That evening, I made a decision that would have shocked the woman I used to be. I called my lawyer, Benjamin Fletcher, a man who had handled Harold's estate and various family legal matters over the years. Benjamin is a good man, probably in his 50s now, who had known our family for decades. "Benjamin," I said when he answered the phone, "I need to make some changes to my will." He was quiet for a moment before responding. "Evelyn, is everything all right? This is rather sudden." I explained the situation to him, speaking calmly and rationally. I told him about the years of declining interest from my children, the broken promises, the casual dismissal of family traditions that had meant everything to me. I explained that I had come to understand that my children viewed me as a burden rather than a blessing. "I want to revise my will," I said. "I want to ensure that my estate goes to people and organizations that actually value what I have to offer." Benjamin, being a good lawyer and a decent man, suggested that I take some time to think about such a significant decision. He recommended that I wait until after the holidays, when emotions might be less raw. But I was firm in my resolve. This wasn't an emotional decision made in anger. It was a practical decision made with clear eyes and a clear mind. The next few weeks leading up to Thanksgiving were surprisingly peaceful for me. I didn't spend my days cooking and cleaning and preparing. Instead, I made arrangements that reflected my new understanding of my place in the world. I called the Millfield Community Center and volunteered to help serve Thanksgiving dinner to anyone in town who might otherwise spend the holiday alone. The coordinator, a young woman named Susan Miller, was delighted to have my help. She told me they could use someone with my cooking experience to help with the meal preparation. I also reached out to several neighbors I had gotten to know over the years, particularly those who might not have family nearby. Mrs. Henderson, who lived 2 houses down and had recently lost her husband of 60 years. Mr. and Mrs. Chen, who had moved to Millfield from Taiwan, and whose children lived on the West Coast. The Williams family, whose teenage daughter Emily had been helping me with yard work and grocery shopping since I had stopped driving at night. By mid-November, I had helped organize what we started calling the Millfield Family Thanksgiving. It would be held at the community center, and anyone in town was welcome. We had over 40 people signed up, ranging in age from 8 to 89. On Thanksgiving morning, I woke up feeling more energized and purposeful than I had in years. I dressed in my best burgundy dress, the one Harold had always said brought out the color in my eyes, and headed to the community center with 3 pumpkin pies and a massive pot of my famous stuffing. The day was wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. I spent the morning in the kitchen with 5 other women, cooking and laughing and sharing stories. We prepared turkey and ham, mashed potatoes and sweet potatoes, green bean casserole and cranberry sauce, rolls and cornbread, and enough desserts to feed an army. When we sat down to eat, I found myself at a table with Mrs. Henderson, the Chen family, young Emily Williams and her parents, and 3 other families I had known casually for years. The conversation was lively and warm. People shared stories about their families, their traditions, their gratitude for the community we had built together. For the first time in years, I felt truly seen and appreciated. These people valued my contributions, my cooking, my stories, my presence. They listened when I talked about Harold, laughed at my old jokes, and asked for my recipes. I realized that I had found a new family, one based on choice rather than blood, on mutual respect rather than obligation. My phone rang 4 times during the day. Each of my children called as promised to wish me a happy Thanksgiving. The conversations were brief and perfunctory. They asked how I was spending the day, and I told them about the community dinner. They all expressed surprise and made generic comments about how nice that sounded, but I could hear the distraction in their voices. They were calling because they felt they should, not because they wanted to. That evening, as I helped clean up the community center and said goodbye to my new friends, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't expected. The old Evelyn, the one who had defined herself entirely through her role as wife and mother, was finally at peace. The new Evelyn, the one who had learned to value herself and seek relationships based on mutual affection and respect, was ready to move forward. The next day, I called Benjamin Fletcher and confirmed my decision to change my will. I had thought carefully about how I wanted to distribute my estate, and I was confident in my choices. My house on Maple Street, the house Harold and I had bought as newlyweds and had filled with love and memories, would go to Emily Williams. That young woman had shown me more kindness and consideration in the past 2 years than my own children had managed in the past 5. She was starting college next year and could use the stability of owning her own home. Harold's oak dining room table, the centerpiece of so many family gatherings, would go to the Millfield Community Center. I wanted it to continue hosting family dinners, just for a different kind of family. My grandmother's china, the set I had always planned to pass down to my daughters, would go to Susan Miller, the community center coordinator. She had mentioned admiring it when she came to my house for planning meetings, and I could see that she would treat it with the respect it deserved. The bulk of my financial assets, including my savings account, investments, and life insurance policies, would be divided between several charities. Half would go to the Millfield Community Center to fund their meal programs and activities for seniors. A quarter would go to the local literacy program, where I had volunteered for many years. The remaining quarter would establish a scholarship fund at the high school for students who demonstrated kindness and community service, regardless of their academic performance. I kept enough money aside to ensure I could live comfortably for the rest of my life, and I arranged for small bequests to a few distant relatives and longtime friends. But my children, the 4 people who had once been the center of my universe, would receive nothing. Benjamin tried one more time to change my mind. He suggested that I might want to leave them token amounts, or perhaps write letters explaining my decision. But I was firm. They had made their choice to exclude me from their lives, and I was making my choice to exclude them from my legacy. Benjamin, I told him, they forgot about me long before I forgot about them in my will. If this story is resonating with you, and you'd like to hear more about how family relationships can change over time, I'd be grateful if you'd become part of our community by subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us share these important stories. That was 8 months ago, and I can honestly say that this has been one of the happiest years of my life. The community dinners have become a monthly tradition, held the second Saturday of every month. We've had Valentine's Day dinners, Easter brunches, Memorial Day barbecues, and 4th of July picnics. Each event brings together people who might otherwise spend these occasions alone. I've become something of a grandmother figure to several young families in town, including the Williams family and a young couple, David and Sarah Peterson, who moved to Millfield last year with their twin toddlers. These relationships feel different from the ones I had with my own children. They're based on genuine affection and mutual benefit, rather than obligation and guilt. Emily Williams stops by my house twice a week, officially to help with groceries and household tasks, but really, just to visit. She tells me about her college plans, her boyfriend troubles, her dreams for the future. In return, I share stories about Harold, about what marriage was like in my generation, about the importance of choosing partners who truly see and value you. The Peterson twins, little Matthew and Luke, call me Grandma Evelyn and run to hug me whenever they see me at the grocery store or the post office. Their parents often invite me for dinner, and I've taught Sarah how to make Harold's favorite pot roast and my grandmother's apple pie. Mrs. Henderson and I have become close friends, bonding over our shared experience of widowhood and our determination to create meaningful lives for ourselves. We take walks together every morning, weather permitting, and we've started a small book club that meets at the library every other week. My children have continued to call occasionally, usually on birthdays and holidays. The conversations remain surface level and brief. They ask about my health, I ask about their lives, and we exchange pleasantries before hanging up. They have no idea about the changes I've made to my will, and I see no reason to tell them. Margaret Rose did visit once in the spring, when she had a legal conference in a nearby city. She stayed for one night, and we had dinner at my kitchen table. She seemed surprised by how well I looked, how energetic and engaged I seemed, She asked about my community activities, as she called them, and I told her about the monthly dinners and my new friendships. "Mom," she said as she was preparing to leave, "you seem really happy. Different somehow, but happy." I smiled and kissed her cheek. "I am happy, dear. I've learned to appreciate the people who appreciate me." She looked puzzled by that comment, but she didn't ask for clarification, and I didn't offer one. 3. Months ago, I had a minor health scare that resulted in a brief hospital stay. Nothing serious, just a bout of pneumonia that required a few days of observation and IV antibiotics. Emily Williams was the one who found me when I didn't answer my door for our usual Tuesday visit. She called the ambulance and rode with me to the hospital. During my stay, my hospital room was filled with visitors from my new community. The Williams family, the Petersons with their toddlers, Mrs. Henderson, Susan Miller, the Chen family, and at least a dozen other people I had come to know and care about. They brought flowers and cards, homemade soup and magazines, and most importantly, their genuine concern for my well-being. My children all called when Emily reached out to let them know about my hospitalization. Margaret Rose offered to fly in. William James said he could drive down for the weekend. Dorothy May suggested I might want to move closer to one of them for better medical care, and Robert Charles asked if I needed anything sent from his restaurant. Thanked them all for their concern and assured them that I was fine, that I had plenty of support locally, and that there was no need for them to disrupt their lives on my account. They all seemed relieved by my response. As I recovered at home over the following weeks, I was overwhelmed by the kindness of my neighbors and friends. People brought meals, helped with housework, drove me to follow up medical appointments, and simply stopped by to check on me. I realized that I had built something I had never had with my own children, a community based on mutual care and genuine affection. Last month, I received a letter that made me reflect deeply on the choices I've made. It was from my oldest grandchild, Emma Catherine, Margaret Rose's daughter. Emma is 24 now, recently graduated from law school, and apparently going through some kind of personal crisis. She wrote to tell me that she had always felt closest to me among all her grandparents, and that she regretted not staying in closer touch as she got older. She was having trouble in her relationship, struggling with career decisions, and feeling disconnected from her family. She asked if she could come visit me, to talk, and to reconnect. Her letter surprised me, and I'll admit, it softened my heart in ways I hadn't expected. I wrote back and invited her to come for a weekend visit whenever it was convenient for her. She arrived 2 weeks later, on a Friday evening, looking tired and vulnerable in a way that reminded me of her mother at that age. We spent the weekend talking, really talking, in ways that I hadn't experienced with any of my children in years. Emma told me about feeling pressure to follow in her mother's footsteps professionally, while knowing that corporate law didn't truly interest her. She talked about her struggles with her boyfriend, who she felt didn't really understand or support her ambitions. She asked me about my marriage to Harold, about how I had navigated the balance between supporting his dreams and pursuing my own interests. In return, I found myself sharing stories I hadn't told in years. I talked about the early days of my marriage, when money was tight and we weren't sure we'd be able to afford children. I shared memories of her mother as a little girl, and her uncles and aunt, and what our family had been like when they were young. I also told her about the loneliness I had experienced after Harold's death, and how I had learned to build a new kind of family for myself. Emma was fascinated by my community involvement and asked to meet some of my friends. I introduced her to Emily Williams, who was close to her age, and to Susan Miller. We attended the monthly community dinner together, and Emma was charmed by the warmth and inclusiveness of the group. On Sunday evening, as she was preparing to leave, Emma said something that has stayed with me ever since. "Grandma Evelyn," she said, "I think you've figured out something that the rest of our family hasn't learned yet. You've learned how to love people who love you back, instead of just waiting for people to love you the way you want them to. Her words hit me with unexpected force because they captured something I had been feeling but hadn't been able to articulate. For so many years, I had poured my love into my children and grandchildren, hoping that if I just gave enough, cared enough, did enough, they would love me back in the way I needed. But that kind of love, based on expectation and obligation, had ultimately left all of us feeling resentful and unfulfilled. The love I had found with my community was different. It was freely given and freely received, based on genuine appreciation and mutual benefit. It was the kind of love that sustained and nourished rather than depleted and disappointed. Emma's visit sparked something in me that I hadn't expected. For the first time since I changed my will, I began to wonder if there might be room for some of my family members in my new life, if they were willing to engage with me on different terms. I decided to write letters to each of my grandchildren, not the perfunctory birthday cards I had been sending, but real letters sharing stories about their family history and my own life experiences. I told them about their grandfather, Harold, about the values he and I had tried to instill in their parents, about the dreams we had held for our family. I also invited each of them to visit me individually, if they were interested, to spend time together and get to know each other as adults, rather than as the stereotypical grandmother and grandchildren we had been for so many years. The responses varied, as I had expected. Emma wrote back immediately, thanking me for our weekend together and promising to stay in better touch. Two of my other grandchildren, David Harold, Robert Charles's son, and Sarah Elizabeth, Dorothy May's daughter, also responded positively and made plans to visit over the next few months. But whether or not these relationships develop into something meaningful, I am at peace with the choices I have made. I have learned that family is not just about blood relations, but about the people who choose to show up for each other consistently and lovingly. My will remains unchanged, and I have no regrets about that decision. My estate will go to people and organizations that have demonstrated their appreciation for what I have to offer. My children made their choices about how much they valued our relationship, and I have made mine. Before I close this story, I want to share what I've learned from this experience, in case it might help others who find themselves in similar situations. First, it's never too late to build new relationships and create new traditions. The community I've found in my 70s has brought me more joy and fulfillment than I experienced in the years after Harold's death, when I was clinging to family relationships that had become one-sided and unsatisfying. Second, love should be mutual and freely given. Relationships based on guilt, obligation, or expectation ultimately serve no one well. The people who truly care about you will show it through their actions, not just their words. Third, you teach people how to treat you by what you accept. For years, I accepted casual dismissal, broken promises, and superficial attention from my children because I was afraid that demanding better would mean losing them entirely. But I had already lost them. I just hadn't admitted it to myself. Fourth, it's important to invest in people who invest in you. The time and energy I now spend with Emily Williams, the Peterson family, Mrs. Henderson, and my other community friends is returned to me tenfold in companionship, support, and genuine affection. Finally, forgiveness doesn't require maintaining harmful relationships. I have forgiven my children for their neglect and indifference, not because they asked for forgiveness, but because carrying anger and resentment was poisoning my own happiness. But forgiveness doesn't mean I have to continue accepting treatment that diminishes my sense of self-worth. I hope that sharing my story might encourage others to evaluate their own relationships honestly and to have the courage to make changes when necessary. We all deserve to be valued, appreciated, and loved genuinely. Sometimes that means letting go of relationships that no longer serve us and opening ourselves to new possibilities for connection and community. If you've found value in this story and would like to support more content like this, please consider subscribing and sharing this with others who might benefit from hearing about these important life lessons. Thank you for listening to my story. My name is Evelyn Margaret Thompson. I am 73 years old, and I am finally, truly happy.